Some men stay quiet because they don't have anything to say. I stayed quiet that night because I understood every word, and I needed all of them before I was ready to do a single thing about it. The restaurant is called the Ridgeline. It sits on a bluff east of town where an old grist mill used to stand before someone with vision and capital turned the property into exposed beams and a prefix menu and a wine list that runs 6 pages. I'd booked our table 3 weeks out, asked specifically for the corner by the east window, the one that looks over the river bend where the sycamores come all the way down to the water. I told myself I was doing it to make a good impression. The truth is, I did it for my daughter. In my experience, those two things are always the same thing. Her name is Cora, 28 years old, pediatric physical therapist at the Children's Hospital in Nashville. I've been watching take care of things her whole life, starting with the stray cat she brought home in a cardboard box when she was 9, ending most recently with me when I threw my back out last spring. She has her mother's hands, long-fingered and patient, the kind that make people feel steadier just by being close to them. When her mother passed, Cora was 19 and she held what was left of this family together with those hands, without letting me see her come apart once. I don't think she knew she was doing it. That's the kind of person she is. She met her fiancé at a conference in Charlotte about 3 years back. He'd come in from Rome on a work trip, presenting research for some marketing firm. She was there for a continuing education seminar. 2 days later, she called me from the airport, and I knew from her voice alone it was real. His name is Luca. Dark eyes, good manners, remembered to call me sir the first time we met and ask about my work like he was genuinely curious. I liked him. I want to be honest about that. I thought he was the real thing. His parents flew in from Rome on a Thursday in late April. His father is Aldo. His mother is Ginevra. They arrived at the Nashville airport with luggage that probably cost more than my first van, and carried with them the particular quiet confidence of people who've rarely been told no about anything. Aldo wore a blazer to baggage claim. Ginevra's earrings caught the terminal light when she turned her head to look at the arrivals board, and when she turned back and saw me, something in her expression settled into a kind of careful, measured warmth. The warmth of someone deciding in real time how to calibrate their performance. I drove them to the hotel in my truck. It's a 2009 F-250, white, with a dent in the rear quarter panel I've been meaning to have pulled for 2 years and a cracked dash I've stopped registering. Aldo sat in the back with Ginevra. Somewhere around the exit for Laper's Fork, Ginevra said something to him in Italian, quiet and easy, and he responded with a low laugh. I kept both hands on the wheel and my eyes on the road and said absolutely nothing. Welcome to Dad's Pure Revenge. I'm glad you found us. This one is going to take you somewhere. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Stay with me. Here is what nobody at that dinner table knew about me. Not Luca, not his parents, and not even Cora, not fully. When I was 26 years old, I took a contract position with a masonry restoration firm doing preservation work overseas. 2 years in Milan, 3 more in and around Rome, working with Italian crews on churches and courtyard walls, and a 16th century villa outside Tivoli that had been in the same family since before America existed. You don't survive 5 years in that environment speaking only English. You either learn or you become useless. I learned the way I've learned everything that's ever mattered to me, which is by getting yelled at by someone who needed me to understand, and then by listening until I did. I came home at 31 with a trade, a callus on my right hand that never fully softened, and a second language that nobody in Maury County, Tennessee had ever had any reason to ask me about. It never came up until it did. Dinner at the Ridgeline started well enough. The bread was good. Aldo had arranged to have a bottle of wine sent ahead, something from a producer in Tuscany whose name he mentioned twice in the first 15 minutes of the meal. He held the glass up to the window before tasting it, communicating without saying so directly that he knew something about this glass that the rest of us were fortunate to be in proximity to. I told him it was excellent. It was, actually. The condescension arrived in layers, never direct enough to confront. Ginevra asked what I did, and when I described building an HVAC and plumbing business from one van and a part-time helper in my mid-30s, she said, "How practical," in exactly the tone you'd use to praise a child who'd managed to color inside the lines. Aldo asked about the county, and when I mentioned a heritage grain farm doing well down the road, and a craft distillery that had become something of a regional draw, he smiled and said, "Rustic charm, yes, very American," like rustic was a word standing in for something he'd decided not to say out loud. I ate my food. Cora was laughing at something Luca was saying across the table, her shoulder against his, and I held on to that the way you hold on to something solid when the current starts pulling. I know how to eat condescension with a smile. You do it long enough and it becomes invisible. I did it for the person across the table from me who had no idea she needed protecting. Then Ginevra looked past my shoulder at the wall. The ridgeline rotates local work near the entrance. That month it included photographs by a woman who'd spent a year documenting craftspeople around the county. One of the prints was a black and white image of a workshop interior. My workshop. And in the center of the frame, clean as a portrait, sat a truck I knew better than I know my own hands. I'd found the truck in 1998, a 1967 GMC half-ton, in a field outside of Columbia with grass growing up through the floorboards and a cracked block and about 40% of its original paint. I spent 4 years restoring it on weekends in my garage, and for about 3 of those years, Cora was my shop helper. She was 10 when we started. She learned to hand me the right wrench by name, learned to read a gap gauge, learned that patience is a form of respect for the thing you're trying to save. She wore that truck to her senior prom because she wanted to. When she left for college, I put it under a tarp and didn't go back into the garage for 11 months. The photographer must have caught it at the county fair 2 summers back. Ginevra tilted her head at the print and leaned toward Aldo and said, in Italian, comfortable as breathing, her voice pitched for a conversation no one at the table was supposed to follow. Someone salvaged that from a scrapyard and convinced themselves it was an accomplishment. Americans confuse labor with craft. They put effort into the wrong things and then expect admiration for the effort. Aldo exhaled a small laugh into his napkin. I set my fork down. Not hard, no scene. I set it down the way you set something down when something inside you goes very still and you need a moment before the next thing. She is talking about 4 years of Saturday mornings. She is talking about my daughter at 10 years old holding a timing light and asking me how an engine knows when to fire. She is talking about the last good thing I built before Cora's mother got sick and everything else became about something else. She's calling it junk from 6 feet away because she's certain I can't understand her. Nobody at the table noticed. Luca was refilling his water glass. Cora was texting under the edge of the tablecloth, smiling at whatever it was. Ginevra settled back in her chair like a woman who'd said a small and private truth and was satisfied with it. Aldo caught my eye just for a second, testing. I gave him the easiest smile I have. The one that says everything here is fine, I'm just a man thinking about dessert. You have absolutely no idea, I thought. Not yet, not tonight. The real thing came 20 minutes later. Dessert plates were cleared. Ginevra leaned toward Luca, not toward Aldo, and said something I had to work to catch over the ambient noise. Her voice was lower now. I caught the word for attorney. I caught a date. I caught the phrase about whether the documents would be finalized before the filing window closed. Luca nodded, said he thought they were on schedule. And then Aldo, his voice just above a murmur, said in Italian, "The father is sentimental. Sentimental men sign things without reading them because they confuse the act of trusting with the act of understanding. You can depend on that." Luca smiled into his espresso cup. He said, "I told you. He wants Cora to be happy more than he wants to comprehend the details. He'll see a family document and feel good about it. It'll feel like love to him, not like a transaction." Then he turned, right on cue, back to English, smooth as a man who has done this before, and he put his hand over Cora's on the tablecloth. "Hey, how are you doing over there?" She smiled and leaned into him. "I'm great," she said. "This is exactly what I wanted tonight." I sat with my coffee going cold in front of me, and I watched my daughter lean into the man who had just described her as a mechanism, who had described me as predictable, as something with a reliable pressure point, as a man whose love for his child was the exact lever they needed. I wanted to put the table between us and the floor. Every part of me wanted to stand up right then. I didn't. Because I've learned the hard way what happens when a father stands up in a restaurant to defend his daughter against something she didn't hear. You become the story. You become the problem. She would apologize on my behalf to the people who just called her naive. She'd defend him because she loves him, and she'd spend the next year carefully managing distance between me and the people who were planning to take everything I'd built. So I smiled. I paid the check and tipped well enough that our server would remember the table. I walked Aldo and Ginevra to their car and told them I was genuinely glad they'd made the trip, and I shook Aldo's hand and held it a full extra second and looked him in the eye and meant every word of it in a way he won't understand for quite a while yet. I got in my truck, sat in the lot for a long time before I turned the key. They think sentimental means soft. I thought about that photograph on the wall in there, the truck and the hours and what the hours were actually made of. I thought about the word sentimental used like a weakness they could navigate around. I thought about Cora's voice when she told me this was exactly what she'd wanted tonight. She has no idea, And when she finds out, it is going to hurt her badly. But a hurt, you understand, is a wound that can close. What these people are planning is the kind of damage that compounds quietly until one day you can't find where it started. I made myself one promise in that parking lot. I'm not going to say a word, not until I know exactly what they're trying to take, and when I know, I'm going to let them explain it themselves, in the language they feel safest in. Cora texted me before I reached my road. Dad, thank you for tonight. You tried so hard with them, and it means everything to me. I read it twice in my driveway. Always, sweetheart, I sent back, get some rest. Then I called Rex Carver. Rex and I had worked the same sites outside Rome for 2 years back in the day before he went into international financial due diligence and built a practice doing exactly the kind of quiet, thorough work that I needed done. It was close to midnight. He answered on the second ring. Ed, long time, what do you need? I need everything you can find on a man named Aldo, I said, and I need you to be thorough. He was. 3 days later, he walked me through it from his office, while I sat in my truck in my own driveway with the engine off. Aldo's export and distribution company, the one he'd referenced at dinner with the practiced ease of a man describing the foundation of his identity, was functionally hollow. Had been for at least 22 months. There were creditors in 2 countries with active claims. The family estate in Umbria, the one they'd let drop into conversation with exactly the right casualness, the kind meant to tell you it exists without looking like they're telling you it exists, carried lines going back a year and a half. Real numbers, the kind that don't resolve on their own. And Luca, Rex said, has an unsatisfied civil judgment against him in Italy. Failed partnership, import operation fell apart 4 years back. Several other parties took losses. It's public record. Nothing criminal, but it is something a man asks about before asking a woman to marry him. He never mentioned it to Cora. Rex confirmed that specifically, not once. I sat in the dark after we hung up and let it all find its proper place. They didn't fly from Rome to Tennessee to meet me. They flew because I own something they need. I own a piece of commercial property about a half-mile off the interstate, 6 acres I bought in 2008 when everyone around me thought it was a terrible time to make that kind of decision. I've leased it to a storage operation, had a small auto shop on the East End, and last year a regional logistics company came to me with an offer that made my accountant go very quiet before he started nodding. That property is the most valuable thing I have, and whatever trust document Luca's attorney was preparing, whatever name they were giving it, Rex had a specific word for the structure, cross-collateralization. My land as the underlying guarantee for Aldo's foreign debt obligations. Offshore, layered, unappealable by the time I understood what I'd agreed to. Designed to feel like a gift. Designed to land before I had time to have anyone look at it clearly. They were going to use my daughter's future to do it. I didn't sleep well that night, but by the time the sun came up I had gone somewhere past anger into something colder and steadier. And I knew exactly what I was going to do. Give them the father they already believe I am, grateful, uncomplicated, a man whose love for his daughter is the one thing you can count on. I called Cora before my first cup of coffee. I've been thinking, I said, instead of Aldo and Ginevra making that drive back and forth from their hotel, why don't they stay here? I've got the guest room. Let them see how we actually live out here. There was a pause. Are you sure? I know last night was a lot for you. Cora, I want this to work. I want to do this right. I could hear her exhale. The relief in it was real and it settled into me like weight. That would mean so much to them, she said, to me. I hung up and stood in my kitchen looking out at the back property and I thought, you want a close look at my life? Come inside. Just know that I can hear every room from every room. They moved into the guest room that Friday. For a week I let Aldo tell me I was holding my grill tongs wrong and let Ginevra gently suggest a different arrangement for the porch furniture as though I'd committed a minor offense against good taste. I nodded. I said I'd consider it. I stored every word the way you store evidence, which is carefully and in order. Then I called Ken Briggs. He'd been my attorney for 11 years, handled every land deal and contract dispute since I started taking on commercial work. The night I read him 3 lines from the trust document over the phone, he went quiet, the way a doctor goes quiet when they're looking at a scan and deciding how to say what they're seeing. Eddie said, this is not a family trust. This is an offshore cross-collateralization agreement. Your commercial parcel becomes the primary loan guarantee for Aldo's creditor obligations. If his company defaults, and from what you're describing it is already in default, there's a lien mechanism in this document that gives his foreign creditors a legal claim on your land within 90 days of your signature. You would be signing your life's work over to pay off someone else's debts on another continent. He paused. I don't scare easily. This one scared me a little. I need a counter document, I told him, something that looks cooperative. And I need everything Rex found organized into a single folder, translated, notarized, in chronological order. Are you planning a meeting? Ken asked. I'm planning a toast, I said. Cora had been organizing the engagement party for 2 months. Backyard, 60 people, string lights in the oaks, her potato salad and my smoked brisket, and a playlist she'd been building on her phone since February. She called it casual, just people we love. I'd agreed to everything she suggested and thought the whole time, perfect. The morning before the party, Aldo found me on the back porch with his coffee. He looked out over my property the way a man looks at something he's already begun to think of in different terms. Ed, he said, setting his cup down, the filing window on the trust document closes soon. We would like to move forward before the wedding if possible. Before the weekend, ideally. I rubbed the back of my neck, shook my head like a man working through something too large for him. This is a big step, I said. I want to do it right. I want it to mean something. What if we signed tonight? In front of everyone? Made it part of the celebration? Something moved through his expression before he closed it off. Something that looked like satisfaction that had arrived earlier than expected. That is a wonderful idea, he said, very meaningful. Ginevra came through the screen door just then, and when Aldo told her, she clasped her hands together like someone receiving news they'd been waiting a long time for. Oh, Ed, she said, how generous, how trusting. I really am, I said, and I meant that in a way she will not be able to reconstruct. If you've been with us a while, drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. Stay until the end. You're going to want to see where this goes. That Saturday evening, 60 people in my backyard, string lights in the oaks my father planted before I was born, brisket coming off the smoker, Cora in a yellow sundress at the center of it, all laughing with her hospital friends, everything looking exactly the way a summer evening is supposed to look. Aldo and Ginevra held court near the head of the long table, my champagne in their hands, wearing the quiet confidence of people who believe the hardest part of a thing is already behind them. Ken was there by the drink table in a blue polo, looking like anyone's neighbor, nothing like the man with a folder in his car out front. He caught my eye once across the yard, gave me one small nod, ready. I looked at Cora one more time. She was at the dessert table with her old college roommate, laughing with her hands the way she always has. And I thought, I'm sorry for what the next few minutes are going to feel like. But you are your mother's daughter and mine, and you are going to be fine. You are going to be so much better than fine. I picked up my glass and tapped it twice with a fork. The yard went quiet in pieces, the way outdoor parties do, conversation by conversation, until the only sounds were the tree frogs starting up down by the creek, and somewhere behind me a single string bulb buzzing faintly on its cord. I appreciate everyone being here tonight, I started. You know me well enough to know I'm more comfortable on a roof than in front of a crowd. That got an easy laugh, and I let it land before I continued. But my daughter is getting engaged, and I have spent every day since she came into this world making sure she never has to wonder if the people around her are being honest with her, if she's safe, if what someone is offering her is what they say it is. The yard was quiet now. I want to thank Aldo and Ginevra, I said, turning toward them, raising my glass just slightly in their direction, for making this trip, for coming this far to be part of this family. Aldo inclined his head, gracious, comfortable. Since you came all the way from Rome, I said, and since we've had some important conversations this week about some important decisions, I thought I'd honor you tonight in your own language, especially since you've spent the last 3 weeks assuming I didn't speak it. The color began to drain from Aldo's face. I switched into Italian. The Roman accent I'd carried home from 5 years of working stone and mortar alongside men who'd taught me to curse and count and negotiate and argue, all of it in one language, all of it still there, steady and clean. I said, for 2 weeks you have spoken in my home as though I were a wall. You have called my daughter naive. You called me sentimental and said, sentimental men sign without reading because they want to believe they're being generous. You planned to put my commercial property into a structure that would have handed your creditors a legal claim on it within 90 days of my signature. You described this to your son as an opportunity, not as a betrayal. I paused. I said, you were right that I love my daughter more than almost anything. You were wrong about what that means about what I'll do. I switched back to English. The table was absolutely still. I spent 5 years working restoration jobs in Milan and Rome, I said, and I heard every word you said at dinner at the Ridgeline, every word in my guest room, every word on my back porch while you were looking at my land like you were already planning what to do with it. I reached down and picked up the folder Ken had set beside my chair. I had a colleague conduct a background review 3 days after that dinner, I said. Aldo, your company has active creditor claims in 2 countries. Your family estate carries liens going back 18 months. The trust document your attorney drafted is a cross-collateralization agreement. My land as the guarantee for your foreign debt. If your company defaults, and it is already in default, your creditors get my property. I have this documented, translated, and notarized. I heard Cora say my name quietly. I know, sweetheart. I looked at her directly. I know this isn't how you wanted tonight to go, but I couldn't let you find out on the other side of a signature. I turned back. Luca has an existing civil judgment against him in Italy from a failed business partnership, I said. He has never mentioned it to the woman he's been asking to marry him. I have the court filing here. Luca stood up halfway. Ed, listen to me, that is not. I looked at him the same way I'd looked at Aldo in the parking lot of the Ridgeline 3 weeks before, even. Patient. The look of a man who has already finished waiting. I heard you call my daughter predictable, I said. I heard you tell your father that she wouldn't read the paperwork, and that to her it would feel like love instead of a transaction. Luca's mouth opened and closed. 60 people in my backyard, and the only sound was the tree frogs. Cora was very still. She looked at Luca the way you look at someone when you're trying to see past the version of them you've been carrying. Doing the hardest kind of accounting, she said. You called me predictable. He didn't answer. The not answering was the answer. She said, you told them I wouldn't read it. Still nothing. She reached up and unhooked the small gold chain at her neck, the one he'd given her in February. She set it on the table in front of him without any ceremony, without any drama, with the absolute quiet of a woman making a clear and irrevocable decision. Then she pushed back her chair and stood up and walked around the long table and came and stood beside me. Not behind me, beside me, shoulder to shoulder. That's my daughter. I set the second document on the table in front of Luca. That's a formal notice, I said. You and your parents need to vacate my guest room by tomorrow morning. The champagne you're welcome to take. I bought it for a celebration I'm glad tonight did not turn out to be. I looked at Aldo. He had gone somewhere in the last 5 minutes. Ginevra had her hands very still in her lap. The practiced warmth was entirely gone, and what was underneath it was the face of someone calculating damage. You flew a long way, I said. You found someone you thought fit the profile. Working man, loves his daughter, wants her to be happy. Won't look too closely at the paperwork. You weren't wrong about most of it. Aldo started to speak. I raised one hand, not angry, just finished. Good night, I said. I put my arm around Cora and we walked toward the house. Behind us, the string lights held steady in the May air and 60 people let us go in silence, and the yard stayed quiet behind us long after we reached the door. At the screen, she stopped, put her head against my shoulder the way she used to when she was small, back when she fit there without either of us having to adjust. How long did you know? She asked. Since the Ridgeline, I said. She was quiet for a moment, then, why didn't you tell me right away? I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the photograph on the restaurant wall and about Ginevra's voice. Calling something I'd built with my hands and my daughter's help a thing someone had dragged in from a scrapyard. I thought about what it means to love someone enough to let them arrive at the truth when they can actually hold it. Because I said, I needed you to see it for yourself, not just take my word for it. She nodded against my shoulder and didn't say anything for a while. Behind us, through the screen, the yard was starting to come back to itself. The sound of 60 people reclaiming an evening, the frogs and the lights, and a Tennessee night that had no intention of calling it done just because things had gone sideways. Thank you, Cora said finally, for hearing what I couldn't. I kissed the top of her head. Always, sweetheart, every single word. We went inside. The lights kept glowing in the oaks, and somewhere at the far end of that long white table, 2 people sat with the silence of a plan that had just run completely out of road, in a language they had been absolutely certain was a locked room. Turned out it was just a door, and I'd been holding the key since I was 26 years old, working stone in Rome, learning to listen in a language they never once imagined I could use. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe to Dad's Pure Revenge. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I'll see you on the next one.